Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel and you're watching TechStrong TV. Today's Tuesday, July 25th. Welcome to the show. We're really coming down to the end of August here. I hope you're all well and safe, though COVID is still something to be afraid of or worry about. Things seem to be getting a little better, at least in terms of new cases and hospitalizations, but there are still people dying every day. And, of course, what we're starting to see now, though, is maybe some of the longer-term effects, not just of the disease medically, but of how this is going to play out in our world. I personally am doing a webinar later this afternoon around security and what are some of the implications of people staying in a remote world. I've spoken to a lot of friends of mine who are basically looking to get out of their office leases because they don't think they're going to use office space. We're doing shows on CISO Talk about what are some of the winners and losers in new security technologies. So all kinds of things going on here, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. We have a great show for you lined up today. Let me tell you a little bit about who we're going to be talking with. Number one, I'm talking with Kevin Simzer, who's COO of Trend Micro, and Geva Salamanovich. I hope I got that right and I did him justice. He is the a CTO for alliances at Sneak. And they've just announced an expansion of their existing partnership today where the Sneak vulnerability, open source vulnerability scanning, will be part of Trend Micro's container security offerings, with part of their cloud security offerings. And I think it also just speaks to a very deep strategic relationship between these two companies. It'll be interesting to see how that develops over time. After that, having more good news, this time from Split, one of the leaders in the feature flag space. And I have Brian Bell, their CEO, and Dave Zilberman of Comcast Ventures to talk about Split's also announced today additional raise, a significant round. And Brian and Dave will join me to talk about that. And then I'm really happy. This is episode 2, but it's actually the third lineup of DevOps Unbound. We have done one episode here on TechStrong TV, and then we've done a roundtable, which was live. And now here's our next one. And on DevOps Unbound today, we talk a little bit about DevSecOps, and I'm really happy to be joined by my friend Caroline Wong of Cobalt, Chief Strategy Officer there, Andrew Vanderstock, the full-time Executive Director of OWASP, along with Dr. Grigory Melnick, CPO at Tricentis, and Mitchell and I. And we have a great discussion on DevSecOps and what we need to do to be more successful there. So don't miss that. And then we'll jump into the archives. We have something old. And again, we'll be pulling from TechStrong Con, where we have Piyush Sharma, who is one of the co-founders of Accurix, and he's going to be talking about immutable security, 3 principles behind immutable security for immutable infrastructure. So that's a good session there. Then I'll be back with the news, what's happening around the MediaOps sites today, then turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, who's now a Florida resident. And Charlene's joining us. She has a good interview with Todd Blaska of TigerGraph, as well as a preview of the rest of this week's webinars. And then Mitchell, over on the analyst corner, we've got Mitchell Ashley, and Mitchell has some good stuff for us today. Mitchell first has a great commentary on jobs and predictions of job loss around automation and AI, and then a good interview with Brett Galloway, CEO of Attack IQ. And then I'll be back to wrap things up. It's another great day here on TechStrong TV. Let's take a break, and I'll be right back with our first guest. Our first interview today is with some breaking news just came out this morning, and it involves an expansion of an existing strategic relationship between Trend Micro and Snyk. You know, Snyk's made a real name for itself as an open source security provider that is really catering to developers doing DevSecOps. However, Trend Micro is using that same technology to enhance their cloud security offering for security professionals. In this latest expansion, they're using the Snyk security vulnerabilities to enhance their container security platform over at Trend Micro. Let's go now to Kevin Simzer and Geva Salamanovich, and if I mispronounce Geva's name, I apologize, about this exciting new expansion of their partnership.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another segment here of TechStrong TV. We've got some big news we're breaking this morning on TechStrong TV. Comes from two companies in the cyberspace that you've probably heard of. One is Trend Micro. Trend's traditional, started in the endpoint security space and most recently has become a power in cloud security, container security. And they've just announced a strategic relationship with our friends at Snyk, or Snyk as some pronounce it. And we're going to discuss what that relationship's all about. Let me welcome our two guests. First of all, from Trend Micro, we have Kevin Simzer, who's the COO of Trend. Kevin, welcome.
Thanks, Alan. Great to be here.
Yep. And joining us from Snyk is their Global Alliances CTO, Geva Salamanovich. Geva, did I mess it up too bad?
You got it right. That's good. And thanks for having us here today.
Not a problem, Geva. Welcome. And, Geva, I don't think we've interviewed you before from Snyk, but we've interviewed many of your colleagues at Snyk over the years and months here on TechStrong, but years, through conferences and everything. So welcome. So guys, news came out this morning of this new strategic alliance, global alliance. Which one of you want to go first about what this partnership and relationship's all about?
Well, maybe I'll start if you don't mind, Geva, and you can jump in and add your piece to the puzzle.
Go for it.
So I think the most important thing that we need to think about is both companies have been, spending a lot of time in trying to solve this riddle in and around cloud security. And this isn't our first strategic partnership. This is actually the second instance of it. So we've been working together for a couple of years. And the first round of it, we picked up and OEM some really powerful technology from Snyk and incorporated into our cloud security platform. And the relationship sort of got off to an incredibly fast start, well received within the market. And we thought, well, a lot of relationships end up fizzling out after the first announcement. But, we felt like this actually had the legs to go a lot longer and deeper. So we started working on a co-development activity where we came together with a specific buyer in mind around security operations, and the two companies coming together and ultimately just trying to do what we do best in our respective areas. We felt like this was a great way to help out our customers. So yeah, we started working on this, and we're really happy to be announcing today the second instantiation of our relationship. So really deeper strategic partnership.
And
absolutely. I'm sorry. Geva, go ahead.
I was just going to add, a little bit on the journey, how we got here. It's one where kind of the executive teams in both companies gel well and have good report and good shared vision. But to enable a partnership to go this intimate and actually build a product together, it also needs kind of the support and the backwind of the broader companies. And what I liked about the journey we've had so far is, other than the good report coming from the top, is all this organic interest between the different field teams the Snyk sellers and the Trend Micro sellers, meeting to work accounts and sell more of the stuff we did in the previous part of the partnership, and now giving more appetite to go even deeper, do something that's a bigger undertaking together, and it's fantastic.
So, guys, excellent. Obviously, yes, this relationship has been blossoming and growing, and we're going to talk about that. But what I want to hit on right now is this announcement and this particular functionality. It looks like we're marrying some of the Snyk open source scanning, for lack of it. And I know there's more to it than scanning these days, but I'm old, and I still call it vulnerability kind of scanning and security scanning, and it's putting this Snyk open source scanning, marrying it to the Trend Micro container security product, so that we can better secure, or at least better look at containers that are being deployed for any open source vulnerabilities. And it really speaks to the fact that today's applications are 80% and better made up of open source components. So if you're not scanning and testing specifically for open source vulnerabilities, open source type of security things, like the struts, and we don't have to go hash all this through, but if you're not looking at that, you're not doing a good job. So let's talk specifically about that if we can, and then we'll talk about the broader implications of the relationship. Kevin, why is this so important today, do you think?
Yeah, again, I can start it off, but Geva will add phenomenal details to it. You summed it up really well in terms of, if we think about the problem domain of 80% of the software being open source, 40 million developers working on this open source, and the cloud is really eating the world, right? So more and more and more, whether it's cloud migrations happening or native cloud development going on, it's just consuming the world in terms of software, it's all a good thing. And what we're seeing is development communities offering up, software release cycles that are getting faster and faster and faster, right? Wanting to release post to a production environment, wanting to release even faster. We have some that are weekly, some that are daily, some that are more, twice daily releases going on. So how can we all come together in order to make sure that that's happening? At Trend, we have, IDC will say we've got the #1 market share in terms of providing a cloud security for workload protection package, that platform that we have. And Snyk, Geva can go into the details, but the undisputed leader around providing security to the development community. So how could we come together and take what Snyk does best, integrate it into our cloud security platform, and make it available to customers? We felt like was the way to go. So that's what we worked on. And that's what we're announcing.
And yeah. I share the sentiment here. Kind of the cloud changed a lot of things. One, it's definitely a new type of infrastructure with many more touch points and a bigger risk surface, and kind of Trend are, done a great job of providing the security from the infrastructure perspective. But cloud also reshapes applications. And so as we're looking at cloud, it's introducing all these new technologies, containers, serverless, open source. And not only these technologies, but also it's changing the scope of the application, where maybe 10 years back, the developers were only concerned about their Java application, but now they're also owning the Docker file. Now they're also owning the Kubernetes deployment YAMLs. They're also owning the Terraform scripts, which actually deploy these applications. And so kind of the breadth of the scope of the application in the cloud era has become much bigger. And then you also tie that to the DevOps movement, where you're trying to have empowered development teams which write all these applications and push them continuously. And you see here, there's a very, very big change in how everything is working and how you need to secure it. So from Snyk side, when we went to market with our Snyk for open source product, it's again about allowing developers to secure those the open source components during dev time as they're building the application. But what we're doing here today with the Trend Micro, it's interesting from the other perspective. It's trying to bridge what the developers are doing with visibility that we want to give to the security operations person. And I see that even from like 3 different vectors. One, there's again this technology, the open source technology, which is now the purview of the developer, and the security operations people, are a little bit behind in having visibility into that. And so through this product, we'll give them that visibility. 2, there's a visibility or the gap in the process where more stuff is shifting left. There's more decisions being made during coding time, at the Git level. And again, we're trying to give the security operations team visibility into that. And the last one is this organizational gap. As all these trends emerged in parallel, we're trying to get the developers and the security team to have a more shared ground so they can have a better conversation versus butting heads, which happens more too frequently than we'd like to admit. So this is actually quite a big undertaking, and we're focusing it around just one technology, the open source technology. But this isn't the end all. If this grows and becomes successful and solves all these gaps that we identified, I think it will definitely give the appetite to do more, and in broader context, solve even bigger problems together.
Absolutely. I with this whole COVID thing, right? And it's not a thing; it's a tragedy. But with COVID and all that, it's affected us all. Some have said that we've seen 6 years of cloud digital transformation take place in 6 months, right? Because if you're not, think about it, if you're not already in the cloud or moving to the cloud, how are you maintaining your business through all this? And I wonder how big a role that's played, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. How big a role has that played in kind of helping to move this alliance, this partnership forward? Geva, what do you think?
I mean, it's definitely there. It's it's hard to ignore it. So as a lot of activities halted because of COVID, and a lot of companies looking internally and looking to be more efficient, as you're saying, to try to weather the storm. Definitely investment in cloud and modernization and DevOps, and we've seen the rise of it. And with that, there's again more and more demand for tools and security that allow people to do that at scale. And all this is raising the awareness to the need and the demand for a solution. And so I see this definitely as a proponent that's helping push such a product to market.
Kevin, what do you guys think with Trend? I mean, even beyond just this partnership, more broadly speaking, in terms of cloud security and cloud, how are you seeing this play out?
We've been similar to what Geva said. Like overall, over the last several years, we're a publicly traded company and we break it out, but our cloud security business has been our fastest growing business for many years now. And what we saw in January, it was, quite pronounced, quite quickly. We saw basically what we did ourselves. People focused in on making sure that employees and customers and partners are safe. And then there was this massive acceleration of cloud projects, in particular ones that were in process. Those definitely accelerated. And then if you didn't have a cloud project on your radar, you probably do now. So, we saw the big shift unfold, and yeah, it's keeping both of our organizations very, very busy. It is really tragic. Certainly the loss of life is horrible. simple things like sheltering in place. I'm week 21 now of sheltering in place here in Texas, and there's some glimmer of hope that things are getting better finally here in Texas. So that's a good sign. But I don't see the shelter in place changing too fundamentally for the next month or so. So yeah, it is a stark reality that we're dealing with.
Yeah, no, I'm in South Florida, Kevin, so I'm in the same boat.
Yeah.
And I've also been basically shelter in place, other than coming to my office. But I'm the CEO here. I sent everyone else home. So this is, I come here so my wife doesn't, I can't stay at home with the wife and kids. I come in here and I'm by myself, but it works, and I don't see it changing. I mean, like Texas, that things are getting a little better here in terms of new cases being diagnosed, new hospitalizations. I think we're even seeing the death rate, coming down a bit. Though, if it was one of your loved ones, even one's too many, right? And it is what it is. But it's certainly having a profound impact on those of us in cloud security, digital transformation, DevOps, DevSecOps, and no one wants to gloat when there's so much misery and people out of work and businesses going bankrupt and all of that. But that's not the case in our little bubble of the world, right? Where we're running as fast as we can, as I'm sure you are, and I know the folks at Sneak are. I mean, it's all we can do to keep up with what's going on. And so count your blessings and be happy for that. Let's return to the bigger picture now a little bit, though. And that is, as you mentioned, Trend and Sneak announced an OEM deal. I feel like we covered it here on TechStrong. Or maybe it was right before, maybe early on. Was it March? Does that make sense? March or April? That deal was announced, or was it before?
Of last year.
Okay, so it wasn't TechStrong, but it was here at Security Boulevard and DevOps.com, because I remember covering that announcement. So, and now we've got a year later, this strategic partnership announcement around container. And look, open source isn't going to be, my opinion, but I don't think I'm off base. Open source isn't going away. It's not going to become any less dominant in terms of making up the majority of the source code in modern applications, right? So, Kevin, I guess the obvious, and you're not in a position to answer this, you wouldn't if you could, or you couldn't if you, whatever. You would, what more do you see yourselves doing with Sneak? I mean, you need an open source security solution. Every security company does today. Right, and you want to be in DevSecOps. It's about open source. It's about making security for the developer, right? Because more and more it falls on them to make sure their code is secure. And so, what else do you think we might see come, fruits of this relationship?
Yeah, right now, I have this hokey line, and I promised Lindsay and Deidre, I wasn't going to use it, but I'm going to use it. Some people.
Okay, go ahead. I just want to make sure we can cut it out if we have to. But go ahead, Kevin.
Because it's you, Alan. But some people search their whole lives trying to find a soulmate, and we've just got a really sincerely good partnership with Sneak. We're incredibly complementary, and whenever I think about the 15,000 customers that we have today on our platform. And our platform is pretty feature rich today with the services that we offer. And, we're doing multiple hundreds of millions of dollars on that platform. But I really think of us as, we want to be the Salesforce of cloud security platforms. And, we found this soulmate with Sneak, where what they do best around developer security, it fits in so nicely into our platform. So we're going to take what they do best, integrate it into our platform, and we think we're going to be able to bring on even more than our 15,000 customers today. And that's ultimately what's all about, right? How can we get how can we get our tools in the hands of security practitioners to do their jobs better is our fundamental goals. And we think that we're potentially on to something right now with this second iteration. And yeah, if this goes well, I have no doubt, because of the strong connections that we have right through the organization, whether it's at the executive level or, down to the engineering level. When you have engineering teams working with each other, you can accomplish great things. And, we think that we're on to something here. So that's why we're really, really pushing hard.
Sounds great. Back in the day when I was doing venture-backed startups, I did many OEM deals around network access control, and that was a hot thing in security, if you remember. And I know what you mean, right? There were several companies where we just had really tight relationships in the product and engineering teams, which allowed us to really develop. They had a much broad sense of the broader market than our little focus, and so it made what was a relatively smaller piece shine in this larger playing field. Kevin, what about you though? I mean, do you worry about, hey, we've got what Trend is doing is great. It allows us to sell more and get our technology out through Trend. But of course there are other channels, other partnerships, other things that you guys are working on.
So what if I'm concerned about it?
Not concerned. Maybe that's the wrong word. But the problem, quite frankly, and I ran into this in my days, doing OEM deals, trying to satisfy a larger organization like a Trend, you just don't have the resources, right? You got to worry about a resource thing, and there's other areas you may want to explore or potentially develop in, but you got to kind of work with your strategic partners.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it I look at it from from this angle. One, there's element of the tech, and the tech is still the same tech. The tech's open source vulnerabilities and how to fix them and all the good stuff. But who are you delivering the tech to? That's that's a fundamental question, and it dictates different types of answers. And so we typically, as a company, build this tool for developers and DevOps personas. And with Trend, we're partnering to build a tool for a security operations persona, which is an expertise that they're bringing to the table. And we'll be only successful in building such a product by working on it together. And then kind of the delivery of it, or the channel aspect of it, the presence of it in Cloud One platform, I think is a key enabler here. It's not an area of concern. It's actually it's a forcing function, because you have all these security operations buyers already on the platform. They're already comfortable with it. They're already consuming all these other services, and we just take all the friction away. It's one click away from getting your hands on the product. And you don't need to manage another vendor relationship. You don't need to, do all this overhead stuff. So I actually think it has an amazing potential. And yes, of course, working with the two companies always has its overheads. You need to manage, alignment and training and salespeople and all the good stuff. But ultimately, I see that as work that's well-deserved. And I think the ROI will be high for both parties. So I'm actually pretty excited about it, much more than I am concerned.
Excellent. Guys, we're over time. I appreciate you coming on. First of all, congratulations on let's call it an expansion of the existing relationship. Fair? Congratulations on that. We'll be looking for more things in the future, more announcements and more functionality coming. I think also, when we look at the wider arc of the DevSecOps story, right, there's always been two elements in the DevSecOps story. One is getting security people involved, shifting it left, involved earlier in the development deployment process. having security not be an afterthought bolted on, right? And I think, Kevin, right, you at Trend Micro, you guys serve that community of security folks who are shifting left, let's call it. And then the other arc, or, you know, trend in, no pun intended, the other trend in DevSecOps, of course, is that we make the developer more security friendly, right? We get the developer working on security. And that's where Sneak kind of makes their bones, right? Developing security tools for these developers who are working in open source. So when you put it together, right, instead of having an overlap like this, you have a complementary broadening of your markets. And that's a great thing. That is a great partnership. From an old corp biz dev guy, you know, those are the ones you look for. So congratulations, gentlemen. You know what I forgot? We all forgot. Where can people get more information on this?
So we've got some details in the press release. And of course, if you go to trendmicro.com, you find everything that you need to know from our website. Would be the first place that I would go. Geva?
Alrighty.
Yeah, I think the press, the PR will have all the relevant information that's available today, and more will become available as we launch more and more elements of the new offering.
Thanks, guys. All right, we're going to wrap it here. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. Breaking news, an expanded relationship between Trend Micro and Sneak. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Geva. We'll have you back on soon. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with our next guest. You know, it's great to hear that even during these unusual times we're all existing and businesses are raising money, exits are happening, good things are happening. Couldn't be more happier for the people at Split, one of the leaders in the feature flag space, who just announced a significant round of funding led by Comcast Ventures. In this interview, I have Brian Bell, who's the CEO of Split, as well as Dave Zilberman of Comcast Ventures. Great conversation. This is also news that's breaking, and congratulations to Split. And it's also really vindication for this whole feature flag space. Let's now go to my interview with Brian Bell and Dave Zilberman.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another TechStrong TV segment. This segment, we're going to be highlighting some big news that came out today around Split. Split is a company that you guys may have heard of. We've covered them on DevOps.com. But if you haven't, not to worry, we're going to bring you up to speed on that as well. At a high level, Split announced a significant funding round today and led and participated in by Comcast Ventures. Let me introduce you to our two guests and we'll jump in. First of all, from Comcast Ventures, happy to have Dave Zilberman with us. Hey, Dave, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Alan. Thanks, everyone, for letting me on the show.
Well, no, if you let yourself on, it's fine. And then joining Dave and I is the CEO of Split, Brian Bell. Hey, Brian, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Alan. Great to be here. Thank you.
All right. Let's take care of easy stuff first. People may say Comcast Ventures. I know Comcast. Aren't those the guys behind, Universal and the cable and everything else? And they are. But, Dave, why don't you quickly tell our audience who Comcast Ventures are?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, we're part of Comcast Corporation. We're the venture capital arm. We've been around for over 20 years. We're a very active investor, investing in a wide variety of businesses. I specifically focus very much on enterprise, from infrastructure to applications to DevOps. We invest in a lot of forward-leading technologies. We work with the companies to help them expand their market opportunities, their commercial opportunities. We've had many companies that we've funded, household names, DocuSign, Slack, that we took exactly through the journey that we'll talk about with Split.
Great. And actually, Comcast as an organization is one that has been an early advocate of DevOps, and we featured them a few times. Actually, I believe we're going to have in the next few weeks another video interview with some recent DevOps, how they're using DevOps internally there. But let's now turn over to Split. And Dave, thanks for the intro on that. Brian, you're the CEO here. Before we get into the funding news, for anyone in our audience who maybe is not familiar with Split at this point, who is Split? What do you guys do?
Great. Yeah. We're a growth company, based out in Silicon Valley, and we're focused on really helping product engineering teams deliver products that have real and measurable value. And the operative word there is measurable value. We allow engineering product teams to roll features out quickly and with great control. But more than that, more than just providing a feature flag, feature delivery platform, we're able to help them understand the impact of those features on the business or on the user experience. And we do that through this feature delivery platform that brings together data, performance, and behavioral data that the customer has, along with the context of the feature flag, which tells us who saw what when the features rolled out. And by bringing the data and the feature flag together, we're able to help measure the impact of features as engineering teams roll them out into the market.
Fantastic. Feature flags is something we've done a lot on here, on both TechStrong TV as well as DevOps.com and Container Journal, our Kubernetes microservices site. And I've got some great questions for you on that. But before we jump into it, let's talk about today's news. Brian, you're the CEO. You should have the honor of share with our audience, give us the high level. What's the news today?
Sure. Well, super excited to announce today that we just raised our Series C financing of $33 million, led by Comcast Ventures, and Dave Zilberman, who's on the program today, will be joining our board. It's a really exciting round for us, and I think really just is a reflection of the demand in the market for platforms that allow development teams to just move faster, roll features out quickly with more control, and in a way where you can really measure the impact of those features. The round, like I said, was $33 million, led by Comcast. All of our existing investors, Excel and Lightspeed, Harmony, all participate in the round. But what's also really exciting is that we had quite a few others participate in this round. 01 Advisors, which is Dick Costello and Adam Bain, who were the CEO and COO of Twitter, who was really excited about what we did because, they use a platform like this that they had built homegrown at Twitter in the early days. And then also participation from Microsoft's venture fund, M12, Atlassian venture fund, and ServiceNow's venture fund. So really, really excited about who's
some real blue chip names there. I mean, the VCs are blue chip VCs, but the angels, or whatever you want to call them here, are also blue chip. My connection to Dick Costello goes back to FeedBurner, if you're familiar, if you remember FeedBurner before Twitter.
Yep.
Yeah.
So all the companies I ever started were funded by Brad Feld, who was at SoftBank, then Mobius, then Foundry. And, Brad was behind FeedBurner, and he introduced me to Dick. Actually, Security Boulevard, our cyber site, is the backbone of it is something called the Security Bloggers Network. Because Dick asked me to start a bloggers network that we pooled all the RSS feeds because he was trying to figure out how FeedBurner could have any revenue. And he thought if we put together groups of blogs on a common theme, he would then interject ads into the RSS feed because everything was RSS then. And so Brad says, hey, my friend Dick wants you to help. So I did this. And then, of course, in 3 months later, he sold it to Google for about $100 million. They still never had any revenue. But, and then he, of course, went on to Twitter. Google comes back to me 6 months later and says, we don't know what to do with this. Dick's told us you did it. And I've taken it back. And today, that's Security Boulevard, actually, with 450 security blogs in it. So, small Silicon Valley world. But go ahead. I'm sorry, Dick. Brian.
No, I was just going to say, no, absolutely. I think the thing that's striking back in those days, you can imagine why in the early days of Twitter, or even when you're exploring, things like, blog platforms and RSS feeds, there was this need to try new things out because you didn't know what the business model was. And so that's why those guys in particular got excited about the investment because, in the early days of Twitter, they would just roll, and they still do, roll features out. You roll it out to 1% of users. You see what happens. Did it drive engagement? Did it drive revenue? And if it does, then roll it forward. And if it doesn't, you roll it back. Or if it has a performance issue, you kill the feature. And that's essentially what Split is about, and providing that for companies that, don't want to invest in building their own platform to do that. Yeah.
I mean, it's not dissimilar to what I do here, to tell you the truth. Dave, so feature flags, look, as someone who runs DevOps.com, I'm really familiar with feature flags. Of course, we've seen several kind of M&A and strategic investments around feature flags. What struck Comcast Ventures about this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's not a recent realization for us. We've known Split for well over a year. We've been tracking the company since last April or so because we've been really intrigued with certainly feature flagging. But I really think, to be honest, Brian's being a little humble. I think there's so much more to Split than feature flagging. I think feature flagging in many regards is just a feature. What we were really, really intrigued by is that, yes, it's the ability to turn certain capabilities on or off from a developer perspective, but it's the ability to integrate into a wide assortment of data solutions within a large enterprises. Better than all of us, Alan, right? Enterprises are comprised of dozens of different third-party solutions that help them deliver the product or the service that they are in business of providing. And so the ability to connect into those third-party solutions, aggregate all of that data with feature flagging, but then to be able to assess and measure the impact to the business of the various features and the various populations got us really intrigued. And what that also ultimately sums up to is, there's this nebulous term of enterprise grade. Well, enterprise grade is when you serve, it's not the SMB, it is a large Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. And it's the requirements they have of third-party integrations, it's security, it's data privacy. It's those capabilities all built into the platform that got us really, really excited about Split. And, we could certainly talk about COVID, but, we very much believe in Split irrespective of COVID, and our decision was made before COVID. I think COVID just absolutely reinforces the criticality of what Split does as more business moves to digital. It has to be digital. And this platform is, in our opinion, just absolutely essential for all those that are conducting business in a digital medium.
Sure. So, I look at it as the feature flag is the tool, right? Is the instrument.
Yeah.
But it really comes down about measuring performance and what happens, right? One of the things I learned from Brad Feld, in the various startups I did with him, he always says, everything can be measured, and we measure everything, right?
Yep.
Every one of his portfolio companies gets preached that. And if you can't measure everything, you can't really make an informed decision, right? And the thing about feature flags is it makes it really easy for us. It's the ultimate A/B test, right? We make it really simple: before, after, this, that, and then based upon that, sometimes it's crystal clear what we need to do. Sometimes it's a little fuzzier, but you know where you're going. And so to me, that's the power behind feature flags. That's the power behind a Split thing is, it's kind of like big data. When big data first came out, great. I got 12, terabytes, petabits of data. If I can't analyze it, what good is it to me?
So the thing,
that's it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The thing we always talk about with big data, Alan, it's not about big data, it's big insights. We don't want big data.
Yeah.
We want the insights.
Exactly. Perfect. So Brian, now, well, this is a Series C. Obviously, there was a Series A and B before it, we assume, right? Talk to me. Where do you think this goes now? Right? I mean, the number of feature flags is like ridiculous. There's like trillions of feature flags that are being used in the development world today, right? In terms of how many you said across different providers. Where are we going?
Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, it goes back to what you were just saying, Alan, which is that the feature flag is the enabler to unlocking all of these higher value use cases. And I think one of the things that is so striking about Split is that was always the idea behind the platform, that, this wasn't about feature flags. Feature flags wasn't the market. Feature flag was the enabler to unlocking the ability to measure, the impact of a feature and to give engineering teams the ability to go back and validate and verify the value that they're bringing back to the business. So a lot of the investments we're making are around building out experimentation capabilities, richer experimentation. A lot of it relates to some of what you were just talking about. There is an element of almost technical debt with these feature flags because there are so many feature flags being deployed within code. How do you manage that? If you're an enterprise company, with thousands of developers rolling out code, how do you actually manage the life cycle of a feature, from the beginning all the way through the end? And then how do you control, maybe those that no longer need to be in the code? So investing in some of these life cycle capabilities, and on the development side, also investing in the ability to meet, as Dave was saying, some of these enterprise requirements. How do you make feature flags auditable, right? So when you roll out a feature, it's great to roll it out to 3% of users, but you might want to have an audit trail that says, hey, my manager approved this feature before I rolled it out to that 3%, or maybe before I rolled it out to that cohort of customers in a given geography or, in a certain demographic. So those sorts of enterprise features are where we're investing a lot on the development side. But candidly, a lot of this is also about just going after the market opportunity. One of the things we've seen starting about 2 years ago is just the enhanced awareness, but also interest in platforms that allow development teams to move quick and have this sort of control at a feature level, and then again measure the impact. So we've seen that momentum in the business, and we've seen this really accelerate right now with COVID. It took us 4 years to get 500 billion feature flags served monthly on our platform. And then within 3 months, we were at 1 trillion, 3 months under COVID, because application development teams are just really moving more quickly and deploying, wanting to roll features out quickly on their platform. So there is an enhanced need in the market for these platforms, and we're going to invest in sales and marketing and some of these partnerships too, these data integrations with performance vendors, behavioral vendors like mParticle and Segment. And also, of course, the application development vendors. I mentioned Atlassian and ServiceNow are investors in this round. And there's a lot of opportunity to really work within those environments to have a more integrated experience for developers as they're living in our platform.
Sure. So, Brian, a couple of things. And we'll try to do them one at a time. First, you mentioned over the last couple of months with COVID, the absolute explosion in the amount of feature flags that are being used, which really points to the explosion in the amount of app development transformation, going on. And I interviewed people here who said, look, we've seen 6 years of cloud transformation probably take place in 6 months, right? And it's crazy, but it's amazing, organizations that were kind of set up for this, or that were already on that road, or culturally were accepting of it. They're running faster than ever. Companies and organizations that weren't, they're the casualties of this, right? And that's the way the world works, unfortunately. There's always winners and losers. The question is, though, at what point is there an equilibrium? Okay, you know what? We did a lot these last 6 months. God willing, we have a vaccine or something, 9 months, a year. we've got to get back to some sort of normality or normalcy, right? And how does that affect? Like in my experience in technology, we never go backwards. We may not go forward as fast, but we don't go backwards. We're not going to go from trillions of feature flags to just a couple of million feature flags. We may not go from trillions to whatever's after trillions, and but where do you see that happening? Where do you see that going, Brian?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, we definitely don't go backwards in our industry. That's absolutely for sure. So it is going to accelerate. I think, first of all, I think what's happened, you kind of captured it well. I mean, what we've seen is, and it's a little cliche, but this digital transformation that we've been talking about for years is it's on turbo boost right now. And, if you didn't believe the world was running on software before, you certainly do now, because everything we do, our learning, our kids' education, the way we socialize, the way we game, the way we shop, the way we get our groceries, it's all online. So if you are an enterprise that is not investing in application development to take part in this new world, you're not going to make it. I think that's very, very clear to all of us. Yeah. And clear to those maybe who weren't believers before. I think what we've seen is, a couple of things. One, we have seen these companies that were already forward leaning, right? That are really taking advantage of the new opportunities. We have customers like, Galileo in the e-health space that's providing, online medicine and telemedicine. And, they're excited about feature flags because they want to be able to roll features out by state, right? As they launch their product in different states to control the rollout. You have Imperfect Foods, which is grocery delivery, another, what I call COVID accelerated business, right? How do you accelerate their business? Skillshare e-learning is another example where these businesses are just booming. So those are the new companies you're describing that are really taking advantage of the opportunity. They already get the power of using, a platform like ours to do experimentation and to make sure they can take advantage of the opportunity. It's a super dynamic market. That's the other thing right now, right? It's just so dynamic. So these opportunities are popping up. But we're also seeing the big enterprises. I mean, most of our business, the growth in our business, Alan, is really in the big enterprise. These more established companies, right? The big, communications companies, the media companies, the telcos, the banks, consumer banking. If you're a consumer bank who is not moving at the speed of one of the fintech startups that are out there, you're not going to make it. And so all of these development teams, I think, have recognized they got to move faster. There's some change management challenges in these businesses, because it's a new approach, to roll a feature out and test it in production. But they're figuring it out, and they're doing it partly out of necessity. And I think the ones that are really winning are the ones that see it as an opportunity to get ahead. And we're working with them to make that happen. Yeah. So I don't think, is it going to kind of, equalize? I think you're going to see some really interesting things coming from the more established enterprises. I mean, Comcast Ventures led the round, but Comcast is also a customer of ours. And, you look at all this, as are other media companies and telcos and streaming companies, and they get it. They know it's all about speed. You got to roll out features on a daily basis if you want to keep customers engaged.
Yeah, I think once you start accelerating, you keep accelerating.
Yeah.
Dave, you want to add?
Yeah, I'd say, look, this is the basis of competition going forward, right? Digital is the competitive battleground. And so in order to compete and thrive, you have to continuously optimize and improve your digital presence, right? It's to your point, Alan, is that those that don't will be casualties, unfortunately. So there will be a continuous, perpetual evolution that's necessary amongst these businesses. And e-commerce will be competitive with one another, and they'll have to continue to optimize and improve. So we think that this is just fundamental to the way business will continue. These are all learned behaviors that will perpetuate, post-COVID, but digital is absolutely just fundamental to business.
Absolutely. I want to bring up another thing, and Dave, you could weigh in too, but I'm going to ask Brian first, and then I'm interested in getting sort of a broader market from your portfolio. And that is, this rapid adoption, Brian, that you saw over the last couple of months and new customers, especially enterprises, it defies traditional sales cycles. And the reason it defies traditional sales cycles is that we live in a democratization of IT era. I call it the builder shall inherit the earth, where what happens is instead of hiring some expensive salespeople, who wine and dine CIOs or, do that whole drawn out thing, you get product in the hands of doers, of builders. And if you deliver delight to them, if they see the value in what you're giving them, whether it's open source or a free trial or what have you, you get it into their hand. You have DevRel and community relations. You get it in their hand, and they become your salespeople. They become your champion. They're the people who, they're in high demand. They can have any job they want. And even in these bad times, you can't hire DevOps engineers or developers and cyber people. And so they're the ones who tell their managers, this is what we should use. It's not what Gartner says anymore necessarily, or Forrester or those ivory towers, right? It's the people who are doing the work, the builders, who are choosing what tools they want to use. And when the only way you can ramp up sales the way you talked here about doing it, Brian, is because those people got their tool in their hand. They said, that's what we want, right? This is the tool for us. Look what we can do with it. And I think that fundamentally changes the game. And Dave, probably more more than just in Split, you probably see it across your portfolio.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Brian,
Alan,
what does that mean?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's completely agree. You call it, what was the term? Democratization of IT. I think it's also, to broaden a little bit, democratization of development too, right? I mean, what we're seeing is that, yes, it's the app dev teams, but it's also the product management teams. It's folks on the marketing side. It's folks within DevOps that want to be able to roll that application out, right? And get that feature out. And what's really important to make sure that they're selling what the customer wants is they got to get the feedback. It used to be, it was always, just so striking, I think, to all of us, certainly to me, that, these development teams would create new code, create new features, roll it out, and they would just hope it was delivering the impact they wanted it to have. And what's key now for application development companies, for all enterprises, is that they get feedback quickly, so then they can course correct. They can say, hey, we rolled that feature out. It didn't do anything. It didn't drive our business forward at all. It didn't increase our subscription revenue. It didn't shorten the time to get a customer onboarded. It didn't drive engagement on our website. Why did we roll that feature out? Let's just kill it. Get the feedback. I think what's critical in the world you just described is the ability to get the feedback, to get the data. So going back to what we said before, so you can make the decisions so that you're delivering what the world needs right now. And that's what's going to drive, growth in these businesses.
Yeah, and I'd echo that, Alan. I'd say, in our world, in the case of Split and so many other companies that we're involved with, is that marketing to the developers, getting to your point, getting these tools into the hands of the developers, letting them test and experiment, determine their level of interest, and then you bubble it up through the organization. Then you go in and sell. The old model of selling into the CIO and hopefully it trickles down to the developers, that model is being radically changed, right? The developers are so critical in this decision-making process at this point. And so marketing to them, building awareness, bubbling it up, and then selling to the top executives. With that said, to Brian's point, the other critical factor is, the developers are so important in the decision-making process. Arming them with the visibility into whether the products they're deploying are actually effective and working is the full circle, right? They want to know, they're making the vendor decisions, and then when they make the decisions and build a product, they want to know whether what they've built, whether they've put out, is helping the bottom line. So completing that, we believe, is absolutely critical, and I think it changes the sales paradigm. Again, COVID is creating this change agent in the way, in how you market, how you sell, in all dimensions is changing, and it won't revert back to January of this year.
I don't believe so either. Guys, I got to tell you, I promised you the 20 minutes goes really quick. That's why we've jammed like 27 minutes into this already, but it's all right. I'm going to let you both have kind of the last word. Dave, why don't you go first, and then we'll give Brian the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, we're really excited about our investment in Split. We're big believers in the category. What Brian and the co-founders and the entire team have built at Split, we're really excited about. We think this is a really big opportunity. You'll see a lot more out of us within this ecosystem as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, great.
Brian?
Yeah, I would just end with, I think this investment round that we're announcing today is really just affirmation that, application development is becoming a more powerful function within enterprises everywhere. And, what we're hoping to do is to empower them to be more successful by moving faster and just helping them have the right insights to make the right decisions so they can deliver value back to the business. So super excited. This is a great conversation, Alan. Appreciate the time.
Not a problem. Hey, Brian, first of all, congratulations, right? Because, people out here in our audience who maybe aren't entrepreneurs or haven't had to raise money, we get a little jaded. This one raised 50, this one raised 20, and all these numbers, and they're just big numbers flying around. Until you have to actually go out and get someone to write a check, and I've had to do it, I know. You don't appreciate it. And Dave, this is your world, right? You don't appreciate what goes into raising a $33 million round, right? Especially with these kind of people. So congratulations. Keep up the great work at Split. I think it's important. It's important kind of work that this becomes the de facto process that software and development DevOps teams follow to continually improve the products, right? Whatever their product is or service. But congratulations, Dave. I think you guys made a good investment here. I hope it works out well for you. Keep up the great work. Dave Zilberman, Comcast Ventures. Brian Bell, CEO Split, here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We're going to be right back with another guest.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Up next, we have another episode of DevOps Unbound. This is our every other week series and then once a month roundtable featuring hot topics in DevOps, acceleration, testing, CI/CD, observability, DevSecOps, open source, and more. I'm having a lot of fun doing this. DevOps Unbound is sponsored by Tricentis, so many thanks to them. In this edition of DevOps Unbound, Mitchell Ashley, CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group, and I are joined by Dr. Grigory Melnik, CPO, Chief Product Officer at Tricentis, as well as my friend Caroline Wong, Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt, and the first full-time executive director of OWASP, another friend of mine, Andrew Vanderstock, and it was a pleasure having them on. We're going to take a deep dive in DevSecOps on this version of DevOps Unbound. Sit back, enjoy, and let's take a look. Hey everyone, this is Alan Schimmel, and you're watching DevOps Unbound. This is episode 2 of DevOps Unbound, and on our show, which airs bi-weekly with a monthly roundtable open to the public, we explore topics in DevOps. If it's DevOps related, it's fair game. Today's topic is DevSecOps, and I realize that DevSecOps has become sort of a mouthful. It's intrinsically linked into AppSec now and everything we do around that. We're going to explore today about really security. Whose job is it anyway, right? Who ultimately, there's a lot more developers, DevOps, testers than there are security people. And we increasingly rely on them to make sure our applications are secure, are being developed and released and maintained as securely as possible. And we've got a great panel of experts to talk about this today. I want to quickly mention, though, this is episode 2. Episode 1 aired last 2 weeks ago, and we will be doing our monthly roundtable. So stay tuned for that. But let me now introduce you to our panel. Joining me first is founder and CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group, my partner and friend, Mitch Ashley. Mitchell, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. Great to be on with you and with this great panel.
Yep. The rest of the panel, I'm going to just say their name and who they work for, and if you can give a little bit of your background. Let's first start with Andrew Vanderstock. Andrew, welcome, and if you can introduce yourself.
Good day. My name's Andrew Vanderstock. I'm the Executive Director of OWSP. I was recently appointed to that role. I've been doing application security since 1998. When we first talked about application security, it was called mobile security because, well, it was applets and ActiveX controls that were running in browsers. So it was a rather exciting and very different time.
That took me back. Yes, it did. Next, the one and only Caroline Wong. Caroline, want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Alan. Thank you so much for having me on today. My name is Caroline Wong. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt.io. We're a company that builds security software. I've been in InfoSec now for 15 years, starting out at eBay and Zynga, some of the original DevOps companies, if you will. I also do a podcast called Humans of InfoSec, and I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor for the OWASP Top 10. Almost 10 years ago now, I published a book called Security Metrics, A Beginner's Guide.
Very cool. And a fantastic speaker, too, I may add. I love watching Carolyn present. And then last but not least, a holdover from our first episode of DevOps Unbound. Dr. Grigory Melnik, Chief Product Officer at Tricentis. Grigory, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me back, and hello, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Yes, as Alan said, I'm the Chief Product Officer of Tricentis, the continuous testing platform and the company that's building the testing tooling for the future. And previously, I've been at Splunk, so this is where actually a lot of my kind of security mindset has been forged. Also MongoDB and Microsoft. So good to be here with this panel.
Excellent. So let me start things off, and then we'll be off and running. Andrew, as the executive director at OWASP, right? There was a time where clearly the OWASP member, the user, the person who you were existing for, was the security professional who was in charge of, as you called it, mobile app security. And then, of course, AppSec has become all the rage probably for the last at least 12 years, right? AppSec is, a lot of people say if it's not AppSec, it don't mean a thing when it comes to security. How has the rise of DevOps, DevSecOps as some call it, some not, how has that kind of changed who you serve, or who does, not you personally, obviously, but OWASP, who do you guys cater to?
So that's actually really interesting. I had a conversation with Mark Curfey, the founder of OWASP, a little while ago, sure, as I was appointed. And the original thing the OWASP folks worked on was the developer guide, which it's a developer guide for developers. And the reality is that we stopped talking to developers. We became very, very internally focused. And we've converted the vast majority of the InfoSec folks to the fact that apps are the firewall. I've done almost all my pen tests through firewalls and over SSL. So the reality is that the application has always been the firewall. We should have been talking to developers much earlier than this. My personal opinion is that, the thing that OWASP has to do right now is to refocus on talking to developers and having tools and information they can actually use in their tool chain. if we're constantly just having that internal, echo chamber conversation, we will fail. And it's really important to me that we actually start doing more stuff like the OWASP dependency check, which can be pipelined, GitHub Actions and things like that. These are where we need to start focusing, not on PDFs. As the person who does the OWASP Top 10 and the developer guide and the ASVS, PDFs are probably what we're famous for, but the reality is developers don't know of it, they don't use it. I really want us to get involved in Stack Exchange. The number of people who post to Stack Exchange just to copy and paste stuff, and that information is just wrong. It'd be really great for people like the volunteers and the chapters and the communities to get involved in things like Stack Exchange and other places where developers hang out.
Excellent. I didn't realize that the original focus was developers. Carolyn, you're in a funny place because you're chief strategy officer at a security tools company, and of course, as you mentioned, you LinkedIn teacher, or whatever the exact term is around AppSec and OWASP. How does that what Andrew said? How does that jive with where you guys see the world?
Yeah. So when I started my InfoSec career at eBay and Zynga, in both cases, these were companies that were running online operations 24/7 with millions of simultaneous users daily. And so it was always clear to us that we had to get it right when it came to talking with the developer. A couple of years before I began my career in InfoSec in 2003, the first version of the OWASP Top 10 was released. And right now, I want to say we're on version 6 or so. Andrew has been spearheading this project for a long time, and we're actually looking out the next revision coming out in February 2021. If I look at the most recent version, which is 2017 RC2, and I compare that to the original OWASP Top 10 that came out in 2003, one of the things that's very striking to me is that at least half of the stuff is the same. So that says to me that on some level, some of these basic security fundamentals that I think AppSec practitioners understand are not either being implemented by developers, and where's that disconnect? So I actually think that as an industry, AppSec tends to focus on sort of the hot and sexy things, which is like finding cool stuff and really interesting, sort of sophisticated breaks. But I think that if you were to look at, for example, the past year or so, if you look at the 10 largest data breaches, I'd be willing to bet you that the majority of those occurred because of something that had to do with like a security 101 basic kind of thing gone wrong. And that tells me that we've been really focused on technology, and actually the hard part is getting the people and the process to work out together. So that's something that I think a lot about, and I think it really speaks to the core of what we're addressing today, which is whose job is it? A security person can find all the vulnerabilities that he or she wants until that security person is effective at communicating what the security vulnerability is to a developer who can actually fix it, and convincing that individual that it's a priority enough to actually spend time remediating, then the code will never be more secure. So it's always needed to be a partnership. And I think that, these days, because of things like the transition of software development methodologies from waterfall to agile to DevOps, I think that culturally we're beginning to see some changes.
I just want to highlight one of those choices that you said. Realistically, the thing that I see as the OWASP Top 10 leader is it's self-referential. The things that people pay attention to is the things in the OWASP Top 10. And in fact, CWE is the MITRE group are about to release the CWE Top 25 in a few weeks' time. And it'll look like the last one in 2011. And this is really sad because people are actually concentrating on these. What we really need is for developers and security people to work hand in hand. And I would like to see the security folks stop delivering PDFs and start delivering, pull requests. If you can fix the problem, you don't have to convince anyone. If you actually start talking in developers' terms and actually convince the product managers that this is the right thing to do, we're going to be a lot more successful than just saying, look, your baby is very ugly.
Andrew, bless your heart. Bless your heart. It's something I've advocated for. It's not that necessarily security people have to become the expert software developers, but I think we've sort of done this to ourselves by thinking security as a penetration activity, right? Something that we're testing from the outside. I mean, now we're talking about very porous software architectures and API security and Kubernetes container security. It's a much more different world than even 5 or 10 years ago. So what I've advocated for, and it's a little bit scary at times, but advocated for security people to learn software architecture, whether they learn how to code or not, but they need to understand what's going on inside the M&M as well as what the outer hard shell, if you will. And one way to do that is to bring software people into security groups. You don't have to go learn it all yourself. You can learn from other people and bring in skills as well. But to your point, it's not an after the fact thing. It's got to be right there in the flow, in the process. If it gets fixed as soon as you find it, because it's a priority, great. If it's a day, 2 week, month later, forget about it. It goes into the prioritization process, and it may be months or quarters before it gets fixed.
Grigori, we're all looking at you, man.
Yeah, I was ready to jump in just up to Carolyn because what she said absolutely resonated with me, and then what my other esteemed colleagues just added to it, rings the bell because I always looked at the security, and again, for a very, very long time, I was focusing predominantly on the developer audience, driving engineering and development teams, platforms, tools, and all of that. And, designing for security is something that's been a, focus of the teams that I was part of, starting from, as early as back at the beginning of the century with the Microsoft, if you remember the early days, having the disastrous year 2000, 2001 with lots of worms and breaches and all that. And then, the back then CTO, Craig Mundy, and, had the internal initiative that later turned into the actual, company-wide letter from Bill Gates, Bill G himself. And that was the beginning of what's known as a trustworthy computing initiative, which was company-wide. Again, we're talking about tens and tens of thousands of people had been, trained and like regularly, not just once, but on a regular basis on the fundamentals of security, on design for security, the whole life cycle. We even didn't talk about SDLC, software development life cycle. We were talking about secure software development life cycle and all the practices that came from it, and it actually bear the fruit, right? Because in general, you look at the history and how much more secure Windows and Microsoft has become. That's actually the results of those early initiatives, right? So by the same token, I think that when we're talking about security and whose job is it anyway, we need to start from the ground up, and maybe even before the junior developers, maybe even at school, right? If you think about software engineering schools, boot camps, whatever format you are learning your coding. It's super important to be introduced to those secure practices, to be aware of the patterns and anti-patterns, right? Like I think IEEE and ACM, the official ones that define the curriculum, they had included for years the topic of software security in there, but realistically, how many graduates of computer science degree has actually dived somewhat deeply in it, right? It's amazing that now it's been so many, 2-3 decades that we talk about, design for security notions and trustworthy computing initiatives, and we still see what Carolyn said, the top 10 breaches. You still see something as basic as a SQL injection attack, right? Cross-site scripting, all that stuff that is almost, I view it as part of a developer hygiene, right? It's just something that you do fundamentally. It's like these days, it's not something that developers, we don't even have this conversation, should developers write their own tests or not? Well, by the same token, there should be no conversation, should developers think about threat modeling? Should developers think about various mitigation strategies? Should they get involved more with the security specialist when it comes to defining or going through the release gates? And yet, when you look around, those secure practices still hasn't made into the mainstream as much as I would have liked it to happen. So I don't know what you guys think. If there's some other ways to it just feels like people start looking at it only when the breach occurs, and then you're facing a massive litigation, right? It's like, but it's too late, right? We need to think about all of this ahead of time, and of course, everything that OWASP is doing and other organizations in kind of advocating for security, promoting the secure mindset, this whole movement of DevSecOps. I absolutely welcome it, because anything that we can do to make developers and everybody on the team to think about security early on, as opposed to the afterthought, is a good thing.
So I have a question for the panel. These vulnerabilities have been around, as you mentioned, Cynthia and Andrew.
Caroline, excuse me.
Caroline, sorry, forever. And it's not like we don't know what they are. We have really smart ID environments that will bring up the objects and what all the methods and parameters are. Isn't there something we can do, either through AI or just in the tool side, so when we're creating software, we have fewer of those basic vulnerabilities? Is that
spoken like a real security person? I think that sounds too magic bullet to me. But Andrew, go ahead.
I want to give Caroline some time to answer this, because there's actually some things I want to talk about education underneath from Grigori's talk before. But fundamentally, we need to take the OWASP Top 10 to frameworks and say, these are the things you must not have. End of story. Done. Okay. You must not have these. And then the developers don't have to think about those other things. And then they can use the developer tools like OWASP Cornucopia, which is like the elevation of privilege game that Microsoft came up with. Do you know what? The reason why we do this again and again and again is that we allow people to use insecure frameworks, and they're not given the guidance they need. If we had engineering students who didn't know about, wind loads and things like that, we'd never have a bridge that stood up. Yet we allow computer science and software engineering students to graduate without taking one single semester of security. That's why we established an education committee before. And we have to get people to actually do it. The ACM syllabus is okay, but it is focused on crypto. And we don't need a lot of crypto folks. We need a lot of people who know how to engineer security properly. Now, I want to hand over to Caroline.
Thank you, Andrew. And, Mitch, I love your question, because I think that one of the things that security leaders must think a lot about is what combination of machines and humans to bring into their application security programs. So anyone who's only using people is clearly missing out on efficiencies that can be found by machines or implemented, as Andrew was saying, with patterns and pre-written things that people should just be using, HSTS. And anyone that's only using machines is on the other side of the coin, missing out on entire classes of vulnerabilities. So I think that ideally, security professionals are working with development teams to use scanners in order to find low-hanging fruit, and then using that information to provide context for analyzing the risk that's posed by those issues. I think it's absolutely a hand-in-hand sort of thing, even if one of those hands is a computer hand. And, kind of the more that we can do via automation and by simply using secure libraries, using secure frameworks, that allows the sort of precious and often more expensive human technical skills to be focused on things that can't be found by machines. Finding things like business logic bypasses, race conditions, chained exploits. Those are the kinds of things that people should really be focused on, not things that can be solved by, again, simply in quotes, because to get folks to actually do it turns out to be another challenge in of itself. But I really do think it's very much the mix of both.
Agreed.
I love the framework idea too, Andrew, and thank you, Caroline. Sorry to mispronounce your name earlier. You
Just
know,
think Sweet Caroline, like Neil Diamond, and
there
you'll
you
never
go.
forget it.
What a wonderful way to remember your name. You know, I wonder too if you layer on top of, putting into the framework. Security people love sort of standards like a NIST framework or something like that. If there was something that, okay, all of our frameworks must meet this, right? And then that's going to get kind of into the process and the psyche of the organization to say, okay, we're only using software that meets blah, whatever that is. Seems like that's one more element that would help with the adoption of standardization of that. Is that practical for something like that to happen?
So I've really been pushing for the idea of the generally accepted security principles, the equivalent to GAAP in the accounting world. There are some fundamentals that we should be trying to do. The very, 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 very first NIST special publication had the OWASP Top 10 in it. It was written in 1976. Wow. It was classified.
Really?
When it was unclassified, and I found it as I was preparing the OWASP Top 10 2017. The only thing that we don't have in the OWASP Top 10 is race conditions. Those guys had race conditions in their first one in 1976, when there was just mainframes, and they only had one processor, and they did things in batch. And quite frankly, for them to think that far forward, it shows how early those folks were thinking. However, I think we need to make sure that we give the developers time to think about, the desire for security. I just want to touch back on what Grigory said before, and I think this is where strategy comes into it. When Bill Gates wrote that memo, they then followed it up with action, executive action. They reset the Longhorn build. Windows 2003 Server Release 2 is a very different beast in terms under the hood than the original 2003. And what was released as Vista was very, very different to what XP was. And that then created Windows 7. So quite frankly, it was, yes, we need support from the top, and we need people at the bottom to understand what this really means. But the fact that they had executive support means that things like SQL Server just doesn't have remotely exploitable bugs today. That is a really good outcome, and it's because of executive support.
Agreed. So we live in a world right now where, quite frankly, without modern applications that we've been surviving on these past months with COVID and everything, imagine how ugly it would be without them. But do we really have that executive support? Maybe not to the level of Bill G and Microsoft and the Trustworthy Initiative. But Carolyn, you at Cobalt, you're dealing with dozens of organizations, right? Andrew, at OWASP, hundreds of organizations. Grigory, Tricentis has how many, customers that you guys have provided? Hundreds as well. Do you really see that top-down support at most organizations? Or was that Microsoft thing sort of a, catching a firefly in a jar kind of thing, lightning in a bottle, right? We just don't see that, unfortunately.
So I'll tell you what. A lot of times when I think about security, I kind of go back to like the principal concept that the only reason security matters is when you have value to protect. And so these days, naturally, a lot of value is moving from the physical to digital worlds. Cybersecurity is more important. I'd actually really like to challenge something that Mitch and Andrew put out with regards to sort of an all-encompassing security framework that says everyone's got to do this. Having worked on the ISO 27034 standard, I'll actually ask if anyone on this panel has even heard of the ISO 27034 standard. Cool. So that's great, Alan.
So I actually tried to provide advice to that when it was coming out, and I couldn't because I wasn't part of the national organization, and that's the reason it failed.
There are a lot of different things, right? And I think that the standards route is one that we've been trying, and I think that sometimes it works better than others. What's really going to work is the market route. So when Bill Gates wrote that memo, my understanding is that Bill did not do it for any sort of noble pursuit. He did it because he recognized that if Microsoft was going to continue building security vulnerabilities into their products, that they were going to lose customers, that they were going to lose market share. And so what's kind of cool that I see happening when I talk to our customers like Verifone and MuleSoft and healthcare organizations and HubSpot and financial organizations is that due to the proliferation of cloud and SaaS, today it's not like you have a CIO who goes and plays golf and has steak dinners with their one big IT software vendor. You know, now anyone in an organization with a credit card and an internet connection buys something and it becomes shadow IT. So the whole concept between these business relationships of trust has been transformed. And what you see is tons of software companies using tons of other software companies. So every software company is also a buyer of other software products and services. And that business transaction requires a level of trust where I'm seeing customers asking for things like a penetration test in order to prove that there's some adequate level of security before a business engagement begins. So my perspective is actually that frameworks are cool and great. Education is cool and great. And I think it's really got to be the market that drives the power and the adoption and the prioritization of security.
You know, Caroline, there was also, thinking back to the Microsoft example Andrew was talking about, I think an important factor in that was Apple, because they were marketing very heavily as a secure.
That was it. Yeah, Microsoft was afraid of Apple.
Competition, you know, and I hate to use the Vista word, but you know, there was some pretty crappy software that had a lot of security vulnerabilities in Microsoft's code, and it was the market, as you said, but it was also competition, because that's when Apple was doing pretty well, or at least rising up in the laptop market. Maybe there's some group of vendors, companies that band together and say, we've got better software because it's more secure, and that now becomes more attractive. I don't know, something like that might happen too.
So we just got involved with really quickly, we just got involved with the Linux Foundation and just established the Open Source Security Foundation, the OpenSSF. And it's early days yet, but I see that as actually being way more successful than, for example, ISO 27000, not 27034, which has got very low adoption. But 27000 bakes in a risk-based approach, which says the business needs to only do that it thinks that it's going to really hurt it. And unfortunately, that then becomes whack-a-mole, whereas the OpenSSF works from the other way around. And I think, you know, with the participating members of GitHub, Google, IBM, Red Hat, and others, and obviously OWASP, we're going to be able to do a lot more there than I think in a traditional standard setting body.
I wasn't aware of that organization, Andrew. That sounds fantastic. We're going to look into it here and see what we could do to help get behind that. Really, really good stuff. Grigory, I know you wanted to talk, and I'm going to give you a chance before I jump in.
Oh, no, I was just going to sum up. So we talked about the importance of frameworks. We talked about the importance of market forces driving these secure initiatives. Now the new organizations that have been put in place. But I am still convinced that it's the developers' mindset that needs to be first and foremost in order for us to be, winning in this space. So doing whatever it takes to take us, the developers, the responsibility for security. It's just like somebody else's job. Oh, I have this ProdSec group that that looks at the metrics and the static scans, and then occasionally does some kind of penetration testing exercises or whatever, and then sends me a bunch of reports, many of which I'll try to justify as by design. No. It's just like as I'm doing my job day in and day out, to be thinking about the security, to be thinking about, okay, what are the different ways how it can be breached, and again, making it part of my daily routine, I think is important. I can tell you internally at Tricentis, I've been in the process of launching this trustworthy computing initiative because we have opportunity to improve in this space big time. But I can tell you, even with some easy things where we do things like hackathons, right? Not everybody participates in the hackathon, right? So what we did at MongoDB, I actually loved it, and that actually did require a little bit of effort, but we had our product security person put together this type of competition, kind of catch the flag, where you would actually have this increasing set of security challenges, where you would have to go and break in, identify all these different holes, and then of course reflect on that. And actually that raised awareness of many developers. So I'm just thinking about what can we do with the small wins, small initiatives, not necessarily at the level of defining the major standards and pulling the big initiatives, but in this kind of a baby steps to move the needle, I think is important. The other
I got it. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Grigori. I was just trying to get in my next place in line, but you go.
Oh, okay. No, but the other point I was going to make is that I also think that for the future of the the internet becoming safer and secure and all of our systems, the other dynamics or the other initiative that I've seen happening and getting more and more popular, this whole collaborative testing or collaborative secure, that companies like HackerOne is doing by engaging the white hat hackers in kind of inviting them. In fact, inviting them to go and launch the attack, but for the purpose of learning and raising awareness. And even if you look at Department of Defense and Pentagon inviting hackers to hack into the Pentagon systems, I mean, if you think about it, 20 years ago that wasn't heard of, right? But what they're doing there is that actually they're making sure that you get all these diverse perspectives, that you're not only looking through the narrow angle of your security department, but this broader community at large participating. I think that there's some hope at the end of that tunnel with the right level of engagement with those collaborative testers, white hat testers, that the overall security posture of the internet of the world will be improved.
So I think bug bounties have certainly been a game changer. I don't think anyone disputes that. But I'm going to tell you something I've learned in my 20 plus years in security, and that is security, as much as we may want to think of it, is not a different animal than many other disciplines within IT and in business in general. And market forces rule. Right? So security becomes important when the business decides security is important. Right? I remember, having a conversation. I did a podcast with the CEO of MongoDB and Couchbase and Rich Mogul, who I think most of us on the panel probably know Rich. And this is 12 years ago on Network World I was writing. And I asked those two CEOs, I said, does no SQL stand for no security? Right? Because we don't see a lot of security in the this is a long time ago. And they both said, they agreed, they said, Alan, we will build more security into our products when our customers demand it. Right now, customers are more enthralled with having this new type of non-relational database, NoSQL database that allows us to be more flexible, faster, scalable, and all of that. We'll get to security, right? A couple months later, MongoDB had a pretty decent breach. Microsoft's a great point. Apple was starting to kick their butt, and the word on the street was, even though Microsoft gave you free AV, maybe you didn't need AV on Apple. Remember those commercials? I don't need AV. I run a Mac. And so it's over and over. When we make security important, Grigori, you guys are the leading continuous testing provider in the world. When your customers start saying, Grigori, we got to test for security as well, because that's part of our quality, right? That's the Q and QA. And we need Tricentis to give us those tests. And you go to companies like a Cobalt, or you go to the organizations that Andrew's talking about, and start building that in there because your customers demand it. Not because it's the right thing to do, not because it's a nice thing to do, because it's demanded, then you'll see how quick developers take security seriously. It's
and
the
it
market.
is happening. Alan, it is happening. The customers are, absolutely, they are, demanding this. They want to see the evidence, and they want to see, they want to have the tools, and again, everything from security testing and static analysis, but they're a lot smarter, augmented with ML, to dynamic analysis and actor-based models, and penetrations and all of it, and all the way to compliance, right? And a lot of other things. And you're absolutely right. I mean, back to the days of MongoDB, when the initial releases were not very secure, but because they were optimizing for the wrong thing. And this is what I fear with a lot of apps. They're optimizing for adoption. It's like, get me as many users as possible. How do you get as many users as possible? You lower the entry barrier. Now, if you lower the entry barrier, then automatically that means that you're sacrificing some security, right? Just like, again, allowing and opening up the ports on local host with MongoDB and all of it in the old days, that's what had happened. Now, all of that is being tightened. You have the security at rest, you have security, in transit. They're doing all kinds of phenomenal stuff with encryption, field level encryption, all of it, but it took like a decade to get to it, right? When you are at the beginning, you're putting something in there and you're trying to win in that race to get more of the magic number of MAUs, right? The monthly active users. A lot of companies and a lot of startups, unfortunately, tend to sacrifice security for that speed to market and user acquisition, and then it bites them later, right? So again, if there's some way to raise the awareness and to think about it early on, so that you don't end up with the unpleasant situations later on, I think that's something that could change the world.
Agreed.
Panel, we're getting near the end of our time, and we have such shy wallflowers here. No one wants to talk. So I know how long it's going to take us to wrap up. I'm going to give you each to a closing, if you will. We're practicing for the debates here. We're going to give you each a chance to leave the audience with the most important thing you want them to leave. And Andrew, also, is it called the Open Source Security Foundation, OSSF?
OpenSSF, yeah. So
OpenSSF?
Yeah, the Linux Foundation.
Is there a website yet for that?
Go to the Linux Foundation first, and then you'll find it. It's one of their initiatives. I don't know there's a special site for it.
All right, love to hear more about that. But Mitchell, why do you want to start off? And your screen's different than mine. But on my screen it goes Mitchell, Grigori, Andrew, and we'll let Caroline bring it home.
Okay, great. I'll make mine brief. I'm actually very optimistic, and I mean this with all sincerity, that listening, people like Caroline and Grigori and Andrew, just some pretty brilliant people that are thinking about this, and all of you had a different but also shared some perspectives, and so I'm hopeful that we're going to make some progress here in the near future. So thank you for working on this problem. That's what I have to offer.
Thanks, Mitchell. Grigori?
So I wish I actually wore a different shirt today. I had a T-shirt from Splunk, and they have some clever slogans there, but one of them said, "Ignorance is not a bliss." And that's my message to all of the developer community. Ignorance is not a bliss. Learn security, get the security mindset embedded, from the get-go, from as early days as possible. The engineering managers think about it accordingly and embed security into your teams early on. And then what Andrew said earlier, I absolutely sign up for it, and I love that. This whole notion on the side of the security specialists, security experts, when you're coming in, don't send me PDF reports of 275 pages and 722 vulnerabilities. Pull requests for the win. Pull request wins today. Pull requests, really, really work. Everything else is just a talk. So again, if security specialists can get more into that rhythm and be more embedded and more tuned to what the developers want and need, I think jointly we will definitely make a difference. So thanks.
Thank you, Grigori. Andrew?
So many years ago, we wrote the OS Developer Guide, and then I did the OS Top 10. And I realized telling people what not to do was exactly the wrong approach. We need to tell people how to do what they want to do better, enable secure business. So the application security verification standard, which I work on, is a set of tests. It's literally written for developers. It's literally written to be testable. And this is actually, I think, really important. We need to change the mindset from a negative, you shouldn't do that, to a positive, how about doing it this way? Because sometimes the developers have a better idea altogether, and we just don't know. But many security folks have the mindset, I know better than you, but they're not security, they're not the software developers, they don't know. We need to have a conversation together, and I want to make sure that we're bringing in developers into the conversation and not treating them as people who don't know that much. We don't know that much either, and I would like for people to have that bi-directional conversation in a positive, not negative fashion.
Fantastic. Caroline, it's all yours.
All right. So the thing that I'd like to leave folks with today is I'd invite folks to check out the 2020 State of Pen Testing Report, which I wrote and co-authored with my colleague, Vanessa Sauter. One of the topics that we dive into pretty deep in this report is sort of the relative capability of machines and humans to find different kinds of web app security vulnerabilities. In addition to drawing upon more than 2,500 penetration tests, the data of which exists in the Cobalt platform, and Andrew, I did connect with your colleague Eric, so we're going to be donating some data to the next OWASP Top 10 project. But in addition to that, we also surveyed more than 100 practitioners in security development, operations, and product across a wide range of industries. And the really good news that I'd like to leave folks with today is that the majority of respondents, in fact, 78%, reported a strong relationship between the security and engineering teams, and we do expect that to grow in the future.
I sincerely hope so. Guys, someone much smarter than me once told me that when you want to impress people and you get in a meeting, you got a real great group when everyone there's smarter than you. And so thank you all. I really felt like we had amazing brain power on this one. I want to thank you all for joining and contributing. We will try to put in the notes on this one some of the links to a lot of the sites that were mentioned, reports that were mentioned, etc. We'd love to have you back on. Maybe at some point in the next month or two, we'll do a roundtable on this topic. We'll add another person or two. Caroline, I know I had spoken to Chenzi Wang about coming on, so because I like listening to Chenzi talk about security. But anyway, and we'll open it up. We'll open it up to the public for questions, and it'll be a great time. But for now, guys, thank you so much. Andrew, best of luck with the new ED position there. And I know they picked the right man for this job. So make us proud. Keep making us proud. Dr. Grigori, we'll see you soon, hopefully on another DevOps Unbound. Okay. And Mitchell, as always, thanks so much. We'll be in touch. This is Alan Schimmel. Many thanks to Tricentis for actually sponsoring DevOps Unbound. Couldn't do it without their sponsorship and help. And we'll see you in 2 weeks with another episode of DevOps Unbound. Have a great day, everyone. For something old today, we're going to go back, as we have been, to TechStrong Con, and I want to introduce you to Piyush Sharma. Piyush is a co-founder at Accurix, and he's going to give us a deep dive on immutable security for immutable infrastructure with 3 principles behind immutable security. So from TechStrong Con, really happy to bring you Piyush Sharma of Accurix.
Welcome to TechStrong Session 1. My name is Piyush Sharma. I'm co-founder and CTO of Accurix. I'm here to talk about what immutable security means for today's cloud-native infrastructure. Let's get into details of what security means to this new infrastructure and how to achieve it. Chuck Fowler published the term trash your servers and run your code in mutable infrastructure and disposable components. It was published in somewhere June 2013 blog post entitled Trash Your Servers and Run Your Code. He actually explained that the industry has started to notice the benefits of mutable infrastructure and software architecture that enables it. This was backed by the fact of the growth in various programming languages such as Scala and Haskell at that point of time. The claim, which many of us believe based on the empirical evidence, is that the immutability leads to the program that are easier to reason about and harder to mess up. Building a new app or upgrading an existing one and throwing the old one away is the mantra behind the immutable infrastructure. This also means that once the infrastructure is deployed, it is never modified. If something needs to be modified or fixed, in any way, infrastructure have to be provisioned. Now, what is immutable and immutable infrastructure means? If in this example, we have an application which is sitting on a server or a container. An application always goes through constant changes. In a mutable infrastructure, the same application gets modified, the new version gets created, it gets deployed on instance B, and it gets rebooted. So the same application keeps on modifying, keeps changes being applied and being pushed and upgraded and patched. Whereas in immutable infrastructure, you would notice that then the application fun, which was supposed to be upgraded or fixed, is first destroyed, and then it gets created again in the instance B. And that is the big difference between mutable. So when you are not going to upgrade an application for any changes, you basically destroy and recreate the entire application. So let's talk about how cloud-native technologies enable immutability. Cloud-native is all about changing the way you think about constructing critical business systems. Cloud-native systems are also designed to embrace rapid change, massive scales, and resilience. Container services, containers, services, service mesh, microservices, and declarative APIs to exemplify the approach. Modern infrastructure is built programmatically using infrastructure as code tools such as Terraform, Chef, Puppet, Kubernetes YAML, Ansible, and others that declaratively defines the configuration and the composition of cloud architecture components. This helps organizations to be agile and also eliminate the risk of manual configuration error. Along with the opportunity, new security challenges also get introduced. Cloud stacks are becoming more complex. In addition, with the addition of new technologies, there are multiple control planes, which increases the attack surface. The stack is being built by one or more infrastructure as code tools such as Terraform, Ansible, Chef, Kubernetes, or CloudFormation template, which leads to fragmented governance because each tool introduces their own method of governing the security. Last not the least, but most important of all, the challenge is even if organizations harden their IAC or infrastructure as code, privileged user can make configuration changes directly in the cloud infrastructure after it is provisioned, which could introduce the risk. Now, what is immutable security means? We believe the only way to secure immutable infrastructure is to adopt a paradigm where organizations embed security into the development process before cloud infrastructure is provisioned, and any changes are made after the infrastructure is provisioned are reconciled with the code that was used to provision it. There are three core principles of this security. The first, immutable security requires a holistic approach of analyzing all the layers such as infrastructure, platform, container, serverless. IC should be and understanding the trust boundaries between them. Second principle is about doing it throughout the life cycle, throughout the DevOps life cycle. Immutable security requires the security best practices are embedded into the DevOps life cycle from code to cloud. IC should be assessed for the security risk and potential paths to the breaches, if they exist any, even before the cloud is provisioned. This helps building the trust in your with your single source of truth, which is your IAC, and ensure your cloud is always created with the proper security in place. And third, and very critical, which is eliminating the posture drift. Privileged users continuously making changes directly in the cloud, or it could be an attacker escalating their privilege in your cloud environment and trying to move laterally. This breaks the immutability of your infrastructure and causes the drift between your single source of truth, which is your code, and actually the cloud. It is important to ensure that the cloud posture does not get drifted from the posture intended through the code. Let's talk about how do we operationalize immutable security. Like we said, immutable security starts with the code that is building the cloud, and that's where the first step comes in. Developers are constantly writing and updating the infrastructure as code across the full stack, which could be your Terraform, Ansible, YAML, or CloudFormation template. Once the code is committed into the code repository, code needs to go through the compliance and security analysis, which is our policy guardrails. All the critical violations found need to be resolved, and fixes are to be committed back to the code repositories. The second stage of cloud provisioning is continuous integration. Continuous integration, at this stage, infrastructure builds are going through a constant evaluation, or any potential risks are being identified and reported. If there are any unresolved violations or unresolved misconfigurations are found, they will be pushed back to developer for the fixes, and once it is fixed, we will move to the life cycle to the next stage, which is continuous deployment. Continuous deployment is a stage where the code is being applied to create your cloud infrastructure. At time T0, when your code have gone through the proper policy evaluation, policy guardrails, and security assessment, like identifying any breach path and creating the threat models, your time T0, when your cloud is born, it has gone through the proper evaluation. Now, at time T0, your cloud was properly assessed and is complying with your organizational standards, and it comes with the proper code and build evaluation. At time T1, a change is being made, and this could be a privileged user making a good change, or an attacker who's trying to make lateral moves. These changes can be good or bad, and hence they need to be assessed for their goodness and badness, and compare with the code that built the cloud. These are the changes that are breaking your immutability. And in order to prevent this, you need to either true up your IAC, which is your code, or roll back these changes by creating a pull request to ensure cloud is never drifted from the code. Cloud is never drifted from the source. So at time T1, the same thing happens again. The cloud goes through another change, but at this time, the immutability is broken again. At this stage, administrator can choose to restore the last known compliant posture and bring your cloud to the same secure state, which is your T3 at this stage. This will be an ongoing operation to the infinity and will remain as part of your entire DevOps lifecycle. Now let's look at how immutable security works in action. Today, infrastructure is provisioned from the code, whether it is networking or it is Kubernetes, or everything is provisioned through the code. So in this example, IAC code is being used to provision a subnet, security group, an internet gateway, and also a Kubernetes pod via pod YAML. At the develop stage, the code is being assessed via policy guardrails, and any risks such as open ports to internet are being identified. As you can see in the screen, there are different standards can be applied at the code stage. It could be HIPAA, it could be GDPR, it could be SOC 2 or CIS or as AWS well architected. And based on those standards, the risk can be identified and reported back to the user. When policy, while policy guardrails are critical, but they aren't enough. And this is where we need to analyze the code for any potential security threats or a breach path. For example, in this case, we can identify multiple paths to a breach by correlating multiple risks, such as EC2 instance is exposed to an internet gateway, not protected by a key, or an RDS, despite being sitting in a private subnet, is getting exposed because it is accessible to an EC2, which has a security group which is open to internet. These threats together can lead to a data breach, which can be easily remediated by breaking the kill chain at each stage, such as reconnaissance or delivery or command and control. Since these breaches are being found in your development stage, these can be remediated very quickly and you can avoid exposing your production instances with these kind of breaches. Breach path prediction is very, very important for any immutable infrastructure, because any remediation of these breach paths and threats require changes in infrastructure, and if these changes need to be made once your infrastructure is created, this will break your immutability. Organizations also need to assess similar risk at the CI/CD stage to ensure unresolved risk aren't going to your production environment and immutability is not being broken. So once the cloud infrastructure is deployed, and we need to continue monitoring the changes that are happening directly in the cloud. And in this case, in this example, there's a change being made, which is a good change. The change is about a security group which has SSH port open to internet is being changed to make it non-public, accessible to non-public with the cyber block range, which is 10.0.0.0.24. Despite this being a good change, it will break your immutability and cause a configurational drift. This configurational drift will be detected, and this detection will be based on the code that you have written to create that infrastructure. So your single source of the truth, which is your infrastructure as code, is always used as a baseline to compare any changes that are happening in the cloud directly. Once that drift is being detected, these drift can be remediated by automatically creating a pull request, integrating with your ticketing system, something like Jira, and overriding the code that had the bad configuration. Once this bad configuration is made, it will go through the same pipeline of development to deploy, to build, to deploy again, and the change will be remediated based on that. If this was a bad change, then the rollback also needs to happen. The rollback will also go through the same cycle. The remediation will have the rollback script that will go back to the developer as a pull request. Developer will merge it to the branch and deploy into the cloud infrastructure. This is how organization will continue to ensure that cloud infrastructure is always immutable. Infrastructure drifts are continuously eliminated to keep the infrastructure's code and cloud in alignment. You can start by securing for free by going to achelix.com, sign up, and keep your infrastructure immutable. If you have more questions, if you have any questions, you feel free to visit our booth, or I'm happy to answer the question. I'll be around for some time. Thank you so much.
It's that time where we do our news, what's happening in the DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal sites here on MediaOps. Again, as usual, this is not a exhaustive list, just a few headlines for you to check out. But over on DevOps.com, we have how serverless technologies can achieve optimal DevOps practices. I had a tough time there with that word. Good article on serverless. It used to be sort of an exception to a rule. It's become much more common now, serverless. People understand it. But check that out. And we also have a good article on the role of AI, ML-powered DevOps in digital transformation. And Mitchell has a good talk on the job market effect of that later on today. We also have Build Tracker adds Jenkins support. Harness survey finds DevOps are happy with working from home. I think it's more than DevOps. I think everyone is. Gitpod open source's on-premises dev platform. It sounds like a winning formula. Over on Container Journal, we have IBM makes Kubernetes anchor for legacy ITSM compliance. Nice contribution there from IBM. And we have Carbon Relay shifts AI ops to the left. You're not hearing the term AI ops as much as you were now. It's all about observability. But nevertheless, there's that. Over on Security Boulevard, we have, is a ransomware attack a reportable data breach? I think it is. But maybe under the letter of the law, it's not. Have a read on the article. SMEs especially vulnerable to pandemic security challenges. SMEs are always seem to be more vulnerable than, they're in a funny place. They're, that Goldilocks zone where they're too little, too big for people not to care about, but too small to have the resources they need to really button down. And then Akamai discovers DDoS copycats. It's just a lot going on in the world of DDoS and around Akamai with that. Good article, check it out. That's it for the news. We're going to now head over to Charlene O'Hanlon, coming at you from Florida with a great interview and a preview of our webinars this week. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with Todd Blashka, who is the COO of a company called TigerGraph. How you doing, Todd? Thanks so much for joining me today. I can't, I got your volume, your sound, something happened.
It went to mute by mistake. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, that's all right.
I'm back.
Okay. All right. I'm right. We're just going to start over. Brian, Paul, we're just starting over. All right. 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at MediaOps.com. And I'm here now with Todd Blashka, who is the COO of a company called TigerGraph. Todd, thanks so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlene. I'm very happy to be here.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, tell me a little bit about TigerGraph.
Well, TigerGraph is a data and analytics company. We focus on finding connections and analyzing connections in the data. The interesting thing is we are all consumers of graph today. When you're looking at your social media, it's finding friends of friends and having connection, how many steps away. So whether you're using Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any of these social apps, you're consuming graph technology. You just didn't know it. It makes your searches better. It makes you find information better. And it's all based on analyzing the relationships in the data.
Okay. All right. So how is this different from, say, traditional data analytics that a lot of organizations are using to kind of uncover business insights and that quote unquote actionable intelligence?
Great question. Most organizations use relational databases. And in relational databases, they store data in columns and rows. And when you have multiple data sets that you want to be able to merge together, you have to do what they call joins. Being able to create an index, be able to point these pieces of information together to be able to correlate the relationship between those. When you're doing that at scale, whether it is a recommendation system, whether it's a fraud application, it is a lot of data, and relational databases are not designed for that. Graph databases are designed to analyze the relationships in the data. So you can look at each of these pieces, whether it's a person, a time, a thing, a place, the information, the connectedness of the data is where graph fits in. And graph has actually been around as a technology for more than 20 years. And it actually started from a mathematical theory that's over 200 years old. And this theory is all about finding the relationships of the data. So if you hit a search in Google and it goes and it traverses the internet and comes back and it gives you this little black box, and inside that box, it may tell you where TigerGraph is, who are some of its customers, and all this information. That is the result of a graph search. It finds information that's most relevant to you based on what Google knows about you to give you that information much more quickly so you can make better contextual decisions.
Okay. All right. So you've given me an example, say social media and Google. Internally to an organization, though, how can a company use this this graph analytics to to uncover those insights? I mean, because it sounds like we're talking about a humongous amount of data that's necessary to be able to process this.
You're right. There are many applications inside an organization, and I'll just name a few. One of them is Customer 360. And everybody today, especially in digital transformation, they're looking at how can I find out who are my top performing customers? What behaviors do they have? And do I have other customers like them, similar customers, that I can then be able to tailor my marketing campaigns, my upsell campaigns to? And when you look at that, you have data stored in many different components in the organization, your CRM system, your billing system. When you start going through all these different systems, how do you bring all that together so you can look at, well, what are all the interactions I've had with Charlene over the last month? And in what context? When does Charlene reach out to me? When have I reached out to her? When has she gone and downloaded a white paper, so on and so forth? So being able to pull all that data together, you're then able to run algorithms on that data to find patterns, to find similarity amongst the data, so you can have a better understanding of who are your customers, what behaviors do they have in common with others, and that will drive more targeted marketing campaigns. So for example, we have customers that are using this to provide better next best action, next best recommendation. You don't want to just be recommended saying, oh, other people have looked at this. You want to see recommendation based on your life stage, for example, your demographic, where you're located. We have, an example here is in the media and entertainment space. We're now looking at all these streaming services. Look at how the different recommendations are, whether it's Netflix, whether it's HBO Max, whether it's Hulu. Each one has an algorithm behind the scenes that is trying to say that to you personally, what is the next best recommendation of a program to watch? And that's where Graph is at the back end, linking viewing behavior across multiple devices. Being, again, if you're watching it on your phone versus through your set-top box, how do we get all that information to know that's all about you, Charlene? And I'm not picking on you, I'm just giving an example.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Because this hyper-textualized approach allows you to be able then to provide a more relevant recommendation experience. So that's one example in Customer 360. Another example is through call centers of an organization. When you're interacting in a call center, you're calling in, and how can we get to serve you the best with the most relevant information, the most recent information based on the interactions? That is pulling data from multiple data sources together, bringing it together into one spot so that you can understand what is happening with that customer. That's another example. And most of these are tied to machine learning and artificial intelligence applications, because what you're doing is finding patterns and similarity in the data, which can drive many of these other applications. That is where this digital transformation is taking us.
Okay. All right. So are there any applications for this technology in, say, IT environments or in application development environments?
Absolutely. One big use case is in the area of metadata management. You want to know the information about your different applications, or this could be around your different IT assets. And when you start looking at the data of all these different assets, you want to be able to create a catalog. And then how do I search that catalog to find out what is in there that can help me, grab that bit of data, to grab that asset and be able to leverage in other applications. And so within IT, these are some of the key areas that they struggle with is where are all my IT assets? What's changed in those IT assets? If I need to look at the data lineage of the IT assets, how can I look at that and map that out? And what you're doing is you're just looking at the relationship of the data, but you need to be able to ask questions of the data and then be able to have it come back and provide you that information.
Interesting. So, I'm wondering, as far as say DevOps is concerned, and including this along the as part of the DevOps tool chain, are there applications, or is there a place for this in the DevOps tool chain to kind of help developers? I don't know, improve their application performance or anything like that?
Oftentimes there are. What we find with Graph is it really comes back to their particular, what challenge they're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. And if they're looking to analyze the relationship in the data, then Graph can be a big help for DevOps. If it's just a store and retrieve, like where a transaction database is good, transactions should stay there. Or if it's just a fast search, like a key value store, NoSQL is a great example. But when it's coming to the use case, or any of the use cases where you're looking at the relationship of the data, that's where Graph can fit into a DevOps situation.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned that the Graph Analytics is a technology that's been around for a while, but it, obviously we haven't really heard too much about it in general. So are we still is this like leading edge technology still, or even bleeding edge technology, or, where is this on the adoption curve?
It is moving fast into the enterprise. Gartner has identified Graph Analytics as one of the top 10 trends in data analytics for the last 2 years. They are projecting that it will be growing 100% year over year through 2023. We actually believe it's going to be much larger. Graph Analytics has been around in, with the FANG companies. That's been their business, has been building this. And so they've had many, many data scientists building this for their internal applications, for the Facebook applications, for the Twitter applications. What we are doing is bringing the power of Graph to the enterprise. What's been a challenge in the Graph space up until now has been the ability for a Graph database, which is very computationally intensive because you are running algorithms on the data, on the joined data, is being able to scale and have real-time performance and real-time updates that can support what the enterprise are doing in this in the digital transformation world. So we often find that Graph is being used in departments to prototype applications, and now we're seeing those applications moving into the mainstream. But the other thing with Graph is there's a very big competitive advantage to Graph. If I can know my customer better than my competitors, I can then make tremendous more value and also revenue from not only those customers, but to acquire new customers. Why do I want to promote what I'm able to do with Graph to others? So oftentimes you'll find many companies not wanting to talk about Graph because of its competitive advantage. And this can be coming in use cases where you're combining with machine learning, which could be used for phone fraud, which could be used for anti-fraud. They also don't want to be able to share all the tools that they're using to provide these kind of services in a public environment.
Interesting. Well, they do say that knowledge is power, right? So I guess it's a competitive advantage for sure.
It really is. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. The customers that are using us and have been using us, it's holding some of their crown jewels because they see that differentiator. And when customers are telling us that one query that they're doing on Graph can save them $20 million, one query saving $20 million per year. And this is actually for one of our customers that's using us for supply chain analytics. And you could think with supply chain, everybody's supply chain is messed up right now because of COVID. What you had planned for 6 months ago is not where it is now. How do you do this new modeling to look at new market opportunities? The customers you thought you would be selling to are not the ones you're selling to now. Being able to do this modeling in real time is a huge competitive advantage. And so we're seeing customers that implement the technology and be able to run a query on the data. And some of them will tell us, we're answering questions we haven't been able to answer for 20 years. And that's directly out of their mouth, not marketing speak, but it points to finding the insights that can make their decisions much better than where they were before. And that's where we're seeing this technology, get deployed, being used from a knowledge is an advantage standpoint.
All right. Well, I'm sure I'm going to be hearing more about graph analytics in the months and hopefully a year or two ahead. But it sounds like great technology, and I appreciate you kind of walking me through it and introducing me to the wonderful world of graphs.
Thank you. And, the one last thing I'd like just to mention is, with COVID, one of the things COVID, you've heard the terms tracking and tracing, or being able to track, COVID. And that is inherently a graph problem, because you're looking at where are the signs of COVID? What are the demographics? All those kind of components. And that clearly is a graph problem. And one of the things we have done as a company is made our software available for free for any organization that will be using the technology to help find a cure, to help find a vaccine, to help reduce the COVID, the COVID outbreak.
All right. Well, that's good to know. What's the URL in case they want to get in touch with you guys about that?
It is www.tigergraph.com. And right from there is a link to stop the virus. And from there, it'll take a user to go and download the software for free.
Excellent. Well, Todd, thank you very much for your time. And as I said, for walking me through graph analytics. I now feel like I know much more about it, and really can see how graph is an essential part of our lives these days. So thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much for your time.
All right, everybody, we've got lots more coming up on TechStrong TV, so please stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey, everybody. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with the TechStrong TV Tuesday webinar preview. And we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com and Security Boulevard over the next few weeks, but I wanted to give you a highlight of the 3 of the ones that are coming up that I thought you might be interested in. So without further ado, let's dive right on in. The first webinar I want to let you know about is called Moving to a Cloud Native Strategy. If you're not doing DevOps, you're doing it wrong. This one is sponsored by Checkmarks. It's happening Wednesday, August 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. And this webinar actually delves into the role of security in cloud native architectures. And the folks on the webinar will be offering some tips and tricks for integrating security testing in cloud native initiatives and to help keep the development process running efficiently without lag or interruption. So if you are working cloud native doing DevOps and you're experiencing speed issues with deployment, please check this webinar out. Hopefully there'll be some information there that you can really put to good use. Our second webinar I want to let you know about is happening Thursday, August 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern. This webinar is called Safe and Secure Applications, Deploying in a Cloud or Multi-Cloud Environment. And this one is sponsored by X Matters. This one is going to feature both X Matters and Circle CI folks. They're going to be discussing security issues in the application development lifecycle and some of the patterns and best practices for ease of testing and deployment management. So what's going to be interesting, I think, is demos. I love demos, and they're going to show how the two companies' technologies can help make the cloud deployment process smoother and more secure. So totally hope that you can join me for that webinar. I'm really looking forward to that one. As I said, I love the demos, so I think you really get a lot out of it as well. The third webinar I want to let you guys know about today is happening Thursday, August 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern. This one is called The Key to DevOps, Testing Early in the Pipeline, sponsored by a new company called Mabel. This webinar will discuss ways organizations can move past quality as the bottleneck for rapid deployment and delivery. They're going to be talking about how end-to-end testing at the earliest stages of development can give DevOps teams the ability to solve problems earlier and proactively update tests so they don't break later, and just become more productive overall. So if testing is kind of the thorn in your side and you've considered an end-to-end strategy, then this is definitely the webinar for you to check out. So again, this one is happening Thursday, August 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. All right, these were just some of the webinars that we have coming up. We have lots more though, so I firmly encourage you to check out both DevOps.com and SecurityBoulevard.com in the webinar section to see what we have upcoming and what we have on tap for you on demand. Lots of great stuff happening over there. So please just go to DevOps.com/webinars or SecurityBoulevard.com/webinars and check out what we've got for you. I'll be back next Thursday to give you the Thursday edition of the webinars previews. So until then, I will talk to you at that point, and I hope everybody stays safe.
Thanks, Charlene. Great stuff there with your interview with Tigergraph as well as the webinar preview. Let's head over now to the Analyst Corner, where we have Mitchell Ashley, who has great commentary today on AI and automation and its effect on the job market. And then a great interview with Brett Galloway, CEO at Attack IQ. Mitchell, take it away.
Thanks for joining me on Analyst Corner. Mitch Ashley, CEO with Accelerated Strategies Group. I'm starting to hear in the media discussed more and more the topic of automation and technology and its replacement of the workforce, people in the workforce specifically. Now, if you've read Bob Russelman's book, which I would highly recommend, The Impact of Automation, he really talks about this, the AI and other things that are going along with how technology is replacing our workforce. And what the social impact of that is. Now, there's a lot of stats. I mean, this is very much in the news these days. I think a U.S. News and Report talked about the rise of robots and automation in manufacturing that expect that to displace another 20 million jobs by 2030. There's also an Oxford economics study estimates 8.5% of the global manufacturing workforce stands to be replaced by robots, with about 14 million manufacturing jobs lost in China alone. So it's affecting China. It's not, cheap labor is not even, if there still is such a thing, is not even immune to this. When you look at just automation in general, another estimate that I read about was 1/4 of the jobs in the US are in danger of automation. Workers at junior positions are facing the biggest threat. By 2030, artificial intelligence is expected to have a $15 billion impact, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I have to tell you my own journey on this path. I can't tell you exactly when it was, but I think it was probably the mid 2000s. I started to sort of sense this uprising, if you will, or changing in the wage disparity, and why some people are moved into new economy as it's created, and what happens to people who are left behind, if you will. And I'm getting into my own opinion area here, but our own government is really, of course, built around growth. It's built around power and money, but it's built around growing business, growing economies, and sort of jobs come along with that. Any social contract we had, if there was such a thing, I was probably thrown out in the 60s or 70s, and you can argue whether there was one before that or not. But what I saw happening was we really focus on the next thing that's coming and how that's going to help us. We don't talk about or do anything about how we retrain or prepare, position folks from our economy, at least the U.S. economy, for whatever that new transition looks like, where we're going to be, what people are going to work on, how they're going to make a living. And that happens over and over, and I suspect at least is in part why we have this increasing disparity between wealthy and the working class, if you will. Really, the middle class is in effect shrinking. And it's never been more true than today, because the other factor we have going against us, whatever it might be, is when jobs are shed in large numbers, like with current situation with the COVID economic impact, and also you can go back to 2008, 2001, those jobs don't come back. Many of them don't come back. And especially now, as we progress more and more forward with AI and with automation, that's an easy point for those jobs not to return and for companies to shed cost and not hire back employees, or at least not hire back the same kind of employees in the same kind of jobs with the same kind of skills. There certainly are those. I'm not saying it doesn't ever happen, but this is more than just, economic tough time for people. It's also, how do you recover? And we always talk about the stock market recovery versus Main Street recovery. I don't even think it's Main Street. I think it's suburban, at your house, in your apartment building, wherever it might be. That's the recovery that each of us cares about individually for ourselves and for our family members. I don't think we're on a path to solve this or change this, but I do think that's also part of why we see the rise of some of the what people would call socialism or social programs on the left side of the political spectrum. And of course, you have dead opposition to that on the right side. And just so you know my background, I've been on both sides of this spectrum. I was born into one side of it and eventually changed my views on my own. So it's something I think we're going to see a lot more conversation about. I'm not sure if we'll see any real action about, because it's going to require our government to invest money in helping people find the next job, not just creating businesses that will hire whoever they choose to hire. And I think some of both is what we need. So I would say, as much as all of us can, let's be compassionate with people. Nobody wants to lose a job. Nobody enjoys losing a job. I've lost some, and it's never fun. And I've been fortunate to always find something pretty easily right after whatever occurred. If I left a company or got laid off or whatever, which has happened to me as well. It's always my network that's supported me. I don't think I've ever gotten a job just by interviewing, not that I can recall. So let's be compassionate with each other. I talked about reaching out to someone you haven't talked to for more than a year. And I also mentioned another idea, which is help someone every day. Find a connection with someone that you can help make that will help them move one step forward in their path to recovery and their path to the next job, the path to recovering some income so that they can continue to support themselves and their family. I really do believe if we seek to take care of each other, not just take care of our business and bottom line, those are important too, but it can't be the only focus. Not and have a society that really truly brings its people into the future, as opposed to leaves them behind to fend for themselves. And I'm afraid we have too much of that. So that's been my opinion. Commentary. People may hate it. People may agree with it. People may lambaste me on whatever, social media, whatever. I honestly don't care, because that's how I feel about it. And that's how I make my decisions of what I want to do and where I invest in companies and technology and kind of work that I do. It's why I do this type of work that I do now, because I think it's a great place to make an impact, and hopefully for the better, not just for myself, but for a larger group of people. So I wish you the best. Let's be compassionate to each other and help somebody today that needs one step forward, can use some assistance in their journey to find that next position.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? RecruitOps is the new way to source engineering talent. From MediaOps, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I'm joined today by Brett, who's CEO at Attack IQ, and we're going to be talking kind of CISO talk here. Brett, thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. And you look very comfortable, especially sporting that Stanford shirt. So I'm sure there's a big story about that. That's probably for another. How about if you introduce yourself, introduce Attack IQ?
Sure. So as you say, I'm Brett Galloway, the CEO of Attack IQ. We're a cybersecurity company. And our business is security control validation. The basic problem we solve is that security controls, of which enterprises now have many implemented, fail silently, right? You can't tell if a security control is working except by testing it actively, right? You may have a security control that detects a lot of intruders, and that's great, but what you really care about is how much it misses. And a security control, by definition, can't tell what it misses. And obviously enterprises know this. They have red teams in place. They do penetration tests in order to test their security controls. But the problem is you just can't test enough. Red team exercises a point in time. The coverage is terrible. The results are unreproducible. And Verizon, for example, notes that 82% of successful breaches of enterprises should have been stopped by an existing control, but weren't. So the cybersecurity problem today is not that enterprises haven't implemented programs.